Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn this month. For those who are not familiar with me, my name is Maya, and I'm the Senior HR Consultant with H2R and your host for today. So this month, we are switching things up. I have invited Brad Ratz, our Director of Growth, Strategy, and Client Experience, along with Jackie, executive coach and workplace culture expert, to have an informal conversation around some of the most pressing topics shaping today's workplace. So I just want to make sure that we have Brad. Brad, can you say hello?
Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Excited to be here.
Amazing. And did Jackie join? Is Jackie there? Let's see. I think I have to admit some people, so give me just a few minutes. Hi, Jackie. Can you see us and hear us okay? She's joining. Okay. Jackie, are you there? I think
Here.
Amazing. Excellent. So our panelists today, as I was mentioning, we have Brad and Jackie. Jackie, do you have your camera on as well? I can't see at the moment.
It's showing that it's on.
Okay. All right. So should we get started? Brad, did you want to do a quick intro, and Jackie, you as well?
Sure, excited to. Just excited to be here and get a chance to speak. As Maya mentioned, my name's Brad. I'm the Director of Growth, Strategy, and Client Experience with H2R. Prior to that, I was head of HR for a large property development firm and numerous roles before that. I'm also a trained ICF coach through the International Coaching Federation, and really excited to be able to share my thoughts and participate in a great conversation today.
Amazing. Jackie?
Thank you, Maya. Hi, gang. Jackie Lauer here. I'm a leadership coach and workplace culture consultant. Been doing it for 25 years this year. I'm that old, so shush. Just honored to be here. And, Brad and I have some answers, but it's just our perspective. So don't be afraid to push back or challenge. This should be useful to you. And so love to hear your views too. Maya will keep us on track though. Right, Maya?
I will. And I just want to open it up in case anyone has any questions. Feel free to use the chat box. You can type your question in at any time, and then I will answer it. And then hopefully Brad or Jackie will chime in. But in the meantime, I have curated some of the questions, and I will begin with the first question for Brad. For which organizations is a fractional HR model most advantageous, and when might it not be the right fit?
Yeah, great question, Maya. I think I'll break it down into two pieces. One is most advantageous, is where I'll start. And for me, when I look at not only the breadth of clients we serve, but the inquiries that we get, the most advantageous that I find are the clients that are curious, right? They want to understand, what does a policy or how does policies impact my work, my environment, the agility as an organization? How do I really understand and create a culture as an organization and harness people as an asset within an organization? And you can tell when organizations are shifting into that curious mindset, typically by the questions that they have. And they already understand to some degree where they want to go. They just don't know how to get there. They need that guidance in terms of how to get there. From the right fit perspective, it's a question that I get asked quite often. And we do internally in H2R, we have a transition service, which is essentially, you no longer are our ideal client, whether or not that's from a fiduciary perspective where, you have 1,200 employees and it's time to shift internally to, due to the complexity or regulations, you need something that's a bit more rigid or regimented, and again, needs to be done internally. But typically where we start to have those conversations are around that 250 employee plus mark. We want to look at where that comes into, and that doesn't mean the interaction ends. Just typically we shift more to like an advisory strategic support versus the entire breadth of HR services that you can get from fractional support. A
Okay.
caveat, and what makes it such a hard question to answer though, is it varies by industry, how regulated you are, even how you've structured your organizational design, even revenue streams, all of those different things become a factor. So I don't have one concrete answer, but I can definitely tell you that, we're one of the first to bring that up if we start to see value from starting that transition service.
Okay. Great. Jackie, did you have anything to add, or should we move to a following question?
I think that was pretty in depth. The only thing is, you guys know, I live in the startup world, half the week, and just thinking about a client I had this morning and a client I had yesterday. The one client is like, we want to build, every person must not be a contractor, it must be in-house. So I want to challenge their belief thinking around that. And then that's okay. If that's what they want to do, it has its own consequences. Might be slower to get HR support. And then I've got a client this morning where I was like, you're going to need fractional HR. And they're like, they're already only 7 people. And they're like, yeah, we do. And so to me, it's a little bit dependent on what are they envisioning in terms of their culture and what would that look like. But I also remind them that fractional HR can be part of your culture. Like, you can have fractional HR for years and they're part of your team. So
Exactly.
that's just an interesting thing that comes up for me all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. I know, Jackie, my head went to when you brought that up of this blend between like a network-based organizational structure where you've got this fractional support versus the traditional organizational structure where everything's done internally, and how most organizations are viewing this almost blended approach and seeing the value of fractional, although sometimes it can be scary to do so. There's definitely more of an appetite out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Second question. What changes do you anticipate in the next 3 to 5 years for HR leadership development and culture work? Jackie, what are your thoughts?
The first things, what I'm doing is scanning the last conversations I've had in the last month with clients or potential clients, right? And so I'm seeing a couple of things that are trending. Emphasis on agility seems to be coming up. It's like, do leaders have the capacity to, adapt quickly, to be that kind of resilient? And everyone's looking for that kind of startup culture where we're agile and we're nimble and we can pivot, but they also want to become a big company that's got systems in place that allow you to scale. So I'm noticing this desire, especially from the mid to larger companies, that are saying we really want to focus on leadership agility. The other thing that I'm also noticing, and I'm delighted to hear, is a real focus still on diversity and inclusion. And as much as Donald Trump has put a negative spin or a bit of fear around where this is going to go, what I'm noticing is the leaders that are attracted to the work that I do are still like, oh, heck no. We know that when we have diversity and inclusion, that we actually live, that we get more innovation, we have more fun, it's psychologically safe here. And so I'm really delighted to see that those conversations are starting to blossom again. And obviously, for me, the obvious one is the tech integration, right? The AI and the analytics, we're getting better at that in HR. It enhances our decision making. It streamlines HR processes, but we're not all doing it well yet. And so what does well look like to your organization? Are we making sure that HR leaders and their teams can also model it to help their teams that they're supporting in-house figure out how to bring this and onboard it faster? So those are the first 3 things that I'm thinking about, are definitely trending.
Yeah, and AI is really big right now, right? It's top of mind for everyone. But I want to go back to
and honestly, Maya, like, it's changing every day. Every day. Like, I was literally on the phone with one of my product leaders for a tech company outside of Oklahoma, and he was like, God, you seem to know a lot about AI. I'm like, no, It's much, but I'm doing my best to keep my head above water, which is how I think most of us are trying to get through this and understand where it's going to add value. And because of that, let me just add, clearly the capacity for human relationship matters most now. The more we understand what AI can do, the more we realize how our leaders had better have the capacity for building trust and emotional intelligence. And that's to me, that's fun because I've been selling this a long time, but it's been a hard sell. It's getting less and less hard to sell. People know it's critically important now. Now I'll shut up.
I agree. No, I just want to go back to your point about leadership agility.
Mm.
How can a leader be more agile? Do you have any tips for our audience?
There's a question. Part of it is about we can pivot and be agile when we have a shared understanding of where we're going and what the marketplace is doing. So I often say when we're competing for our vision where we want to go, part of being agile is slow down to speed up. So it's a little bit about, are your players aligned? Do you understand change management and teaching a few change management principles, but also being able to have those kinds of conversations to say, what are you believing about the market? Why do you think this is important? And learning to have those comprehensive, fulsome conversations. So it slow you down to speed you up so we can get there faster. Those are a couple, just a quick thoughts to
I
answer
love
your
that.
question.
Brad, do you have anything to add to that? What do you think?
No, I just, it really resonated with me with the speed in which businesses operate and that priority for agility. And I think part of what you said there that landed with me or resonated with me was creating the space to slow down and having some of those conversations. And my head went a little bit to the book, The Culture Code, and
Mm.
being impactful and purposeful with employee collisions and understanding where are they overlapping, where are those connection points. And when you think about remote or hybrid work, you even need to be a little bit more intentional with when those employee collisions occur and the context and when they're happening and what's happening in those employee interactions. So I'm happy you brought that point up. I think it's critical. And then technology, I think, is one that can help but also hinder, right? It can be overwhelming. I know we looked at a few different talent management software vendors recently, and it's amazing how quickly that scope creep can happen because there's just so many providers out there. And so, for me, the lesson learned is you need to understand what you want it to do and what you need from it before you start going out there and searching, because it can be overwhelming right now.
Oh, so
Mhm.
true.
Agreed. And you touched on the hybrid work. So with hybrid and flexible work becoming the norm right now, how can organizations maintain strong culture and engagement without really relying on the physical presence? What are your thoughts, Brad?
From a hybrid or remote work environment, I think it's a matter of, well, I guess I would take it from 2 points. There's a company who's transitioning to that hasn't traditionally worked within those contexts, and where employees are used to, the lunchroom to interact, the cooler, the different areas of the office. And so I think you need to be conscious and have a plan as to what that looks like. And there's multiple examples out there, but I think it's a matter of what would fit for you. And then the other one would be companies that have been doing that the entire time. And I find those companies already kind of have figured out what's working for them. Um, but it's a matter of keeping those top of mind and then not taking advantage or taking or being complacent with the advantages that you have, that this culture has almost been formed around this remote work, flexible environment. One even recently that's come up is just the ability to not expect a response to an email within 5 minutes of sending it, right? If you really have a flexible environment, sometimes that timeline for response can be extended, and it doesn't mean that there's no business continuity or function, but it is a different mindset to be in. And if you were, kind of born into that environment, it's easier, I think, to get there than these companies that are shifting from an on-site to a hybrid or remote work environment.
I love that you mentioned that. Jackie, did you want to chime in as well?
Sorry, and sorry for putting the question in the chat. It
No,
was
that's
me just
okay.
trying to remember the chat, and I'm like, I just shared it with everybody. Remember the question. I just love Brad's answer. It's also about, I love the word curated or intentional with culture. So when I look at how many of the companies are thriving post-pandemic in the hybrid environment, in my opinion, it's those who have been intentional in creating the cultures that they want. And so, for instance, I think about what my sister works for the University of Guelph, and one of the things we were talking about is we've gotten away from understanding synchronous versus asynchronous. We were talking about this just last night. So stop making people show up at an office when no one else is there, sitting in their little cubicle and no one's talking to them. Make sure that we're designing when you come into the office, what does that look like? And then what are we doing to allow, as Brad says, allow those collision meetings to happen either A, organically, or B, with intention, right? And so to me, it's like, stop just sitting back and expecting it to happen naturally. It's a strategy. Build the strategy.
And I've been reading in the news, there's been a push to get the employees back into work, especially some of these big companies that we read about. Why do you think that is,
I
Jackie?
believe my first response to that is when I'm listening to some of the leaders who are pushing hard for it. I think it's two things. It's one, it's like they didn't like that leader in particular didn't like working from home. So number one.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, that's interesting, because I've got some leaders that are loved working from home, and so that's their mindset. They assume everyone else does. That's one. Number two, it's a control issue much of the time. We can't see our people, so we're not as productive as we used to be, and therefore we need to bit of micromanage their hours. That's still in people's psyches, instead of figuring out how to lead better in this environment. And then for me, lastly, is we do have a work-life balance issue. We have mental health is becoming a massive trend that we're all facing in our personal lives and in our work lives. And the belief is that when we're so isolated in our homes, it's leading to mental health. So many believe that that's supposed to help. So those are the first three things that are popping into my head.
I love that. Okay, Brad, anything to add?
Yeah, I think for me, I agree with Jackie. My head and what I've seen in terms of what's been reported is it's a lack of shifting to outcome-based management, and it's still that traditional time tracking management. Although, Jackie, I have to say I haven't really put the two together from seeing the comfortability of the leadership team from a personal lens in terms of what they're comfortable with and what works for them. And it seems to be, my head immediately goes to that makes sense, right? I can connect those dots
Me too. I know a
myself.
few
That's a
leaders,
very
right?
interesting.
I
Yeah.
know a few leaders, and now I'm thinking back, oh, that's why. So yeah, you make a great point, Jackie, that I never thought about, right? It just, I guess it stems from you personally and then projecting that onto everybody else. All right. Um, Next question. So, what are your thoughts around performance management? Once a year, two times a year, never? Do we do it formal? Do we do it informal? Jackie, what do you think?
I actually really love this question, and my answer might be annoying because I'm going to be a bit vague. My belief, my hope, I suppose, my dream is that we don't need a formal system like that. There are some organizations that I've met that believe they've created a feedback and learning culture where that we can be really open, we can give great authentic feedback up, down, and across, and then we're a learning culture. And so as much as I love that dream, and I'd like to believe we don't need performance management, the reality is that human beings, a lot of them are not good at these kinds of conversations. We're not disciplined or ritualized in giving and receiving feedback. And so my belief is if we can do a mix of both, right? Continuous feedback, creating that kind of culture inside your organization. And so a bit of a hybrid. And then we need documentation from a pure legal compliance standpoint. Let's make sure we're documenting. And that gets missed sometimes when we're creating these feedback cultures and learning cultures. So to me, I want to see a hybrid. I'm noticing companies certainly open to considering that, but they've got to have the time and the money to invest in how do we build that feedback culture and that learning culture. That's its own strategy, right? So that's my story.
Okay.
I love
Brad?
that. I think for me, my head goes to a few different things. So first is performance management. It depends on the context that it's brought up, right? I think about my conversations with leaders and it's, well, we need to do performance management only once we've identified that there's a performance issue. And then it isn't really a program at that point. It's a process that the manager's thinking that they need to follow. And part of that, again, is that it should never be just the process. It should be part of the culture and the system and the organization as a whole. And so for me, when I talk about is it once a year, two times a year, never formal, informal, when I look at that, I look at really talking to the organization and what you're saying behind the frequency of which you're doing performance appraisals. And so for organizations that are informal versus someone that's really formal, what that tells me is if you have an informal program, you have a high degree of trust in your leaders that they're providing the necessary feedback at the right moment, at the right time, and in the right way. And you can see this especially in organizations that have a large delta in generations working within that organizations. Gen Z statistically says they want feedback at least once a week, right? Then you look at millennial is at least once every month. And so there's a generational difference in the amount of feedback needed to keep that employee engaged and what that person at an individual level. So if you have less of a formal program, but you do have the leadership team that's capable of doing that, the program's going to run quite well. And then performance management really becomes a discussion in context of a process of what to deal when you have a substantial performance issue that's beyond the skill set or the norms of that manager to actually deal with. The other thing when I look at performance management, I think as a best practice is to decouple the performance management with the merit increases. Most organizations really combine those two and integrate them so you cannot separate them. And so rather than actually becoming a time to provide feedback, to talk about career, to talk about growth, then it becomes a matter of looking at it from the angle of this is my review. As soon as you talk about the money, everything else is essentially a waste of time. None of it's remembered, none of it's going to be action. This is just the time of year that I get my money, whatever that cadence looks like. So that's one part to that. The other part about decoupling it that I'll touch on for one sec that works really well is if somebody does have an issue with salary, they have a competitive job offer as an example. If you only talk about compensation strictly at one point in the year, that employee could potentially hesitate to bring that up to you. And now you've lost a really valued employee to a competitor because you've isolated this merit talk to a single point in time versus when it's decoupled and you can have those conversations during the year, you open up that dialogue and your retention rate for those employees is typically a lot better. All of that with an asterisk, it takes a lot of work to get there, and it's not a simple switch you can flip. But there is definitely merit to it. So I know I went a couple different ways, but I think it is a broader topic, and I think you need to have a little bit more conversation. But the underlying piece for me is the frequency and how much it's mandated typically is a direct correlation to how much trust that company has in their leaders and the skill set of their leaders. If you have to have a 15-page performance management frequency with templates and all of those other things, what you're really saying is our leaders aren't capable of doing that yet, and we've got to dictate this now as a process.
Okay. And Jackie, I noticed that you were nodding your head when Brad was talking about decoupling, performance management from merit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with what he said. This is the moment where I wish I could see people's faces. I'm sure you all have some experiences and opinions where you can add value. Don't be afraid to share a story in the chat. I'll tell you what was in my head. I was listening because I totally aligned with Brad. I was thinking the other thing I'll often do with clients is say, if you can separate performance management conversations with developmental conversations, it can confuse an employee. So one minute you're giving me feedback and I'm not meeting the expectations, and the next minute you think you're my developmental coach and helping me grow. And so I always say, if you're going to have them together, be clear and intentional about the purpose of that part of the conversation. So I don't know if that's useful to people, but I found a number of my clients are like, that has helped. So I want to build trust, right? You want to build trust with your employees. So if I'm confused, is this developmental and you're trying to engage me in an open concept conversation about where I can go? Or are you sitting here giving me feedback on how I'm actually doing right now? So just a little thought, separate where you can performance management conversations from developmental.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
love
that's a
that.
great point. I love that. And what about if someone's just thinking of implementing performance management, or reviews for the first time? What would your tips be? Do you just, let's do it and let's do it once a year, or should they from the get-go do it, every quarter, or should they do it, 2 times a year? What do you think?
Asking me?
Yeah, sorry, I keep looking at you, but I don't know if you can see that. Yes, Jackie,
I
sorry.
love that. That's so good. Because I do this half the time in the week, building those kinds of conversations with startup or scale up companies, I'm going to start with their belief systems. Like, what does the environment look like, the culture that you're trying to create? What is your experiences with these kind of conversations? What did that feel like for you when you were a leader? What did it feel like for you when you were an employee in the past? So I want to get at what their beliefs and their hopes and wishes are, and then we design from there. I want to challenge sometimes their perspective and make sure they're gathering data from other companies and experiences. So I don't come in with this is the model you must do. It's like, what are you wanting to create here? And what do you want that to look like and feel like when it's in action? So that's usually where I start. And also the other thing I would add is please remember, to Brad's point earlier, this isn't just a process. How you are being during this process is pretty important. So what are the behaviors, which that look like and feel like when we're in that experience?
Okay, Brad?
Yeah, I resonate with that. My head goes to even in my previous roles, delivering performance reviews with employees. And the biggest compliment that I always found was, you've done it right when they say there's nothing new here. I already know where I stand, and I'm happy to sign the piece of paper because you've got everything that's flowed into that in the previous 12 months. You've got that relationship, and there really is no surprises. And then the conversation versus, I'll backtrack a little bit. Then sometimes
Mm-hmm.
if it's not done right, the conversation shifts to the past, and you can't change the past, right? The past has always happened. So when you get into those and say, I already agree with the feedback, a great summary of the year, then what happens is that conversation typically turns out to be future focused and shifts more into that developmental, engaging conversation, which will typically provide a greater return, right? That they're going to walk out of
Mm-hmm.
there with next steps, building blocks for themselves versus focusing on mistakes that they've already had in the past, or that's
Mm-hmm.
already in the past.
I love that. And like you said, there should be no surprises when you sit down and speak, to an employee or, with your leader. There should be zero, um, uh, what do I want to say? Surprises, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. Jackie, this one, I'll start with you. How do you know when someone needs training versus coaching? This is always, you know, a fine line, I find. So, how do you go about assessing, if someone needs coaching versus training?
Not this question. It comes up all the time in almost every day of my career. So for me, the training, I want organizations to move towards training when there's shared, like if there's a vision of shared knowledge or skill that is required to lift the organization or that team up. So when there's more than one, training seems like a good model, right? The other thing for me is a little bit around if I'm coaching someone, I'll think of a guy that I had yesterday, I will say to them, hey, do you mind if I take 20 minutes and do a teach piece? So it's like putting my mentor or trainer hat on. I'm going to do a teach piece. And the reason for that is it's specific frameworks and methodology that help them move faster. You can tell I'm a bit biased. My bias is we want the training and the mentoring, but we also want it coupled with coaching. When we want the coaching, it's where it's believed that a transformation needs to happen. And what I mean by that is to challenge their beliefs, challenge their assumptions, challenge their, I haven't got other phrases, their biases, if you will, so that the transformation happens when you're asking the personalized, tailored questions to help them think through their own learning and development, their own mindset, their own competency and skill set. You can't personalize it in training. You can do it a little bit, but not at the same level as coaching. So it's a big, long, vague answer. I want training to happen when there's more than one person that needs the skill set and where they don't require that sort of personalized development. That's my first response to you.
Okay. And Brad, what do you want to chime
Yeah,
in?
it's not a one size fits all, but my head goes to I think most people on the call have worked with that one person where you're just like, if they can get out of their own way, they could do so much. And I think that's what coaching can help bring out is it can help them pause and work through the barriers that are stopping them from being, their potential self and their future self. And so that's one area that I look at. And you can get that through feedback and observations, and most organizations look at it from that way. The other piece, though, from coaching is they have to be open to coaching, right? Training, you can kind of superimpose. You can say, here's a checklist of courses. You have to do these courses. I can see if you've done the training or not. Coaching, yes, they can participate in the meeting, but if they're not a willing participant, typically it's hard to make that a beneficial time. There's not a real ROI versus training on a course. At least they'll get a checklist, or you can say, yes, they now know steps 1 through step 8. So it's different parameters. But for coaching, oftentimes I see it where it's, we see the potential, or you can see the potential, but something's a barrier there, and you really need them to kind of transform or shift.
Okay.
It helped me to find the language better for my answer. And I would say if it's a skill that you need the person to learn, that's training. If
Okay.
it's a skill and some transformation, that's coaching. So when I think about my new client yesterday, it was like, I'm going to do a 20-minute teach piece on change management. It's a specific thing he needed to understand to go forward, and he was aligned to that. That's training.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Going back to the ROI, Brad, that you mentioned, how can HR leaders measure the ROI of culture and leadership development that we're talking about, initiatives in a way that resonates with, the CEOs and the executives that we deal with? Brad.
Yeah, I think, well, I would tie this back. So if you're building these types of programs, you should be building as part of that strategy what you're going to measure them against, right? And that can vary organization to organization and can vary on what data sources you have available. But my head goes to the stuff that we would traditionally see. So you can measure those cultural transformations in employee engagement surveys. You can measure them in attrition and turnover. You can also engage them through other means. Like one interesting one that I saw was they had like an AI scanning tool scan their team's messages for sentiment. And that's what they started basing off of their impact around culture. And so that's pulling a little bit more technology into the space as what's possible that may not have been possible before. But it was an interesting way to measure the success in terms of their cultural transformation.
Okay. I love that. I just want to make sure, just I check on the chat. Okay, there's nothing. Again, if someone wants to chime in or have a question, please type it in. I did receive a question actually to my personal mailbox from a client asking, going back to performance reviews, when should a small business have formalized performance review, or should they, keep it informal? Like, when should you, try to introduce it? Is there, a number, or is it all about culture? Jackie, what do you think?
When you say a small business, was that the context of the question?
Small, what do you mean? Sorry.
Or, sorry, I thought the question specifically asked about small businesses doing. I
That's
want to make
right.
sure I understood.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just for small business.
Well, to me, I don't care if you're big or small, make sure you're having that conversation before the first 3 months. Like it's so what I want to see is organizations and leaders normalizing those kinds of conversations so that when we do have them, they're not shocking, like, oh, this is uncomfortable. It's like me sitting saying with my son, Jack, we need a we need to sit down, me, you, and your dad, to talk about, and he just glazes over in this sort of look of panic, like, oh God, we're having a family meeting. In the workplace where we're talking about performance management. So I want to normalize it, make sure we're doing it in before the first 3 months come up, do it again then. And then it's like, what, and let them know in the onboarding process, what does that look like here in our organization? Is it quarterly? Is it annually? But for me, I want to at least get them to normalize those kinds of conversations in their processes.
Okay. Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to try to read between the lines in the question, and I'll take some inference from the question. And so,
Sure.
building off what Jackie said, I think you always want to have some feedback loop system. But if I try to grab the inference from the questions, when do we formalize things? And so the way that I would look at that, and if I was an owner operator, when do I need that? And so for me, it would be, as an owner operator, if I need to truly transition away from an operational role, meaning I have leaders under me that I need to fully trust in managing a department. I've hit that point, that inflection point as an owner operator, when I can no longer have my hands in every part of the business. That's typically when I would say you're really at the point where you need to start looking at, what does this program as a whole look like for me? And that answer isn't that you need to do a formal 1-year performance appraisal process, but it does mean that you need to have something formal in place. What exactly that means to your organization can vary, but that would be typically where I think those conversations start happening, is when you reach that inflection point where, as an owner operator, it's just not physically possible for you to have your hands in every single bucket at once.
Okay. I like that. Thanks for answering that. Okay. How does a leader or even an HR professional identify early signs that an employee might be thinking of leaving? Jackie.
For me, the obvious one is the decreased engagement. So you'll notice a noticeable drop in their participation, whether it's in meetings or even their passion or enthusiasm for the projects. A lot of times I'll hear leaders say, well, he did get kind of quiet. It's like, yeah, start noticing the behavior change and the decrease in engagement. Number one. I guess number two for me is decreased productivity. So you've got a high performer, but they're somehow not as dedicated and committed to the timeline. So their work quality or output might decrease and their timeline might decrease. Could be subtle, but those subtle signs are a big sign. And the other thing for me is increased absenteeism. So if you've got someone that's always shown up on time and they're always engaged, but you're noticing they're taking Fridays off and Monday mornings or easing in, it's fine. It's a good moment to sit down and say, what's happening for you? I'm noticing change. What are you needing more of or less of? And starting to have those conversations.
Okay.
Awesome.
Brad?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to just try to go a layer deeper. So I think we all get that gut feeling, right? That tells us often if somebody's starting to disengage or maybe looking elsewhere, or maybe we don't know what the reason is. One thing that I found helps is if you look at how they've spoken in the past. So if an employee was always talking about things 6 months into the future, I want to get X done, or I'm looking to learn this by, next year, 6 months away. And their verbiage and their conversations start shifting to 30 days away, or 15 days away, or 2 months away. And there starts to be a delta in how far out they're looking. That's usually a pretty good indicator as to their engagement shift, and that they're potentially looking for an exit. And that oftentimes is why your gut's telling you that, right? Their actual sentiment, their conversational tone, and their timelines are shifting. And that's why your gut's telling you something's off here, something's changed with this employee. And you can just start looking at, okay, what has shifted here? And oftentimes that's what you'll find when you start looking at it from that lens. And I say that trying to give some actionable items as to, okay, I have this, or I think this might be happening. What can I do as a leader? And those are some things that you can check to try to see if there might be opportunity and need to have a conversation there.
Okay, great.
I'm going to share a story in case it resonates with someone, but it disappoints me, but this is actually what happened. A client had an AI bot created to scan the names of all employees on LinkedIn to notice when their profiles are being updated or more active. And so for them, it became, and I hate it. I don't like it. but it's certainly something I've learned about, and like that sucks, but it's what they did.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Um, okay, we do have a question that came through. I think this goes back to the training and coaching. So, from Bruce, thanks again, Bruce, for submitting this question. Most managers feel they do not need training and or coaching when it comes to employee engagement and supporting their team. How do you influence and or engage them? Jackie?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. I tell you, and I've been around long enough to know. I used to joke and say when I started my business, I used to sell to leaders what I'm going to do to help them, and it didn't work. And so what I realized is I had to sell to leaders what they can do to help them work with their teams, because their teams need the work, not them. Right?
Right. Okay.
What do I do? It's like demonstrate value with data. So it's sharing stats and case studies that highlight the impact of training or performance management and engagements, whatever it is. It's like give them the
Mhm.
data to prove that those results have had that engagement survey has had results or specific improvement. I'll give you an example. One client, we introduced a feedback culture, and it was a 3-year project. And every quarter we had stats to show what are we doing well, where are we missing the mark. So that's how you get the buy-in, and then connect training to their success. Like it's like, okay, so let's illustrate how engagement skills can be lead with better team outcomes, but in turn reflect how has that additional knowledge or competency improved your engagement and your results with your team.
Mm.
And so just highlighting those stories, especially with similar industry and or similar skill sets, give them a safe environment to process that. Then encouraging self-reflection. I have one client, I move him forward until I gave him an assessment. And so he's very analytical and logical. He didn't want to talk about emotional intelligence and feelings with me. He needed an assessment. So sometimes it's finding the right tool to offer a diverse perspective on what they might be needing more of. And then, of course, the 360 feedback, getting some people that they genuinely care about and will listen to, giving them some
Mhm.
perspective of what they might need.
I love that. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll break it actually into a few different segments. I think about that entry level leader, that's full of energy and excited, and they typically want the feedback. But what I think the tipping point is creating a safe space where they can make the mistakes that they want to learn, and they want that guidance. You just have to create the space for them to do it. I really resonate with Jackie when you start getting into some of the senior leadership roles that want some guidance or need some help. You almost have this ego that you need to work through, and that is through assessments that you can do, really showing them the data. And Jackie, you mentioned my favorite tool is the 360-degree exercises that really can help kind of open the eyes as to what's possible, and also leaning into that what's possible, right? I often ask questions around the what if scenario. Well, what if this changed? How much would it help you? And getting them to start reinforcing with themselves some of what the benefits would be if there was positive change. And that typically seems to help. But I do think there needs to be a separation as to, what degree and where they are as a leader, and then
Mhm.
adapting your approach based on that.
Okay. I like that. So not a blanket approach, but, figuring out, if they're an emerging leader versus, seasoned leader and go from there. Okay. All right. I think another question came through. So for the most part, HR's role has evolved over time, yet a number of HR leaders do not seem to be operating as part of the leadership team at the strategic level, and or the leaders of the company do not see them at that level. How can you change this? Jackie.
It's one of my favorite topics, I got to tell you right now. I was thinking about when I left Ottawa and I came to Kitchener-Waterloo and I was trying to build my network and my business here. One of the first things I did was started doing some speeches specifically to HR leaders saying, get a seat at the table. Like I was like, why don't you have a seat at the table? Because for me, it's critical. I mean, and it breaks my heart that we're still not where we need to be, but we're getting there. We're not where we need to be. Number
Mhm.
one, align HR goals with business strategy. Like so many managers or leaders think that HR is in the way. We're about risk mitigation and process and policy. It was like, no, what we need to do a better job of saying, if be a part of strategic planning. If you're not invited to the table, ask to be invited to the table. If you have a really clear understanding of the business strategy and the goals for the org, then you're showing and demonstrating your alignment of the HR goals to those business strategies. Even if you're not being asked, pull it together and share it. Like, right? Develop the
Absolutely.
HR strategies that are directly supporting those organizational goals. Maybe it's talent acquisition aligned with business growth, as an example. I remember when I was at Nortel, I remember saying to the VP HR, oh, please don't put me in HR. Can you please put me over under sales? And they're like, what? It was because I didn't feel like their voices were being heard. And I wanted to make sure that my talent acquisition team, I kept saying, my people are salespeople. We're going to make sure you get people in your org that are aligned to your growth. And they finally started to listen. They thought I was weird, but they were listening. And then, of course, showcasing HR's impact with the data. Like, even if you're not asked, you're building the deck, the messaging, whatever it is. Use the metrics to demonstrate all the HR initiatives that are contributing to those goals, to that bottom line. Improve retention rates, enhance employee productivity. If they're not asking, you show it, but link it to the business goals. And of course, creating those case studies. I always say, create the repeatable stories. Those case studies that are good to help people repeat the story about the successes that you've had and the improvements or impact that you've had on the business. And then lastly, I know I'm on a soapbox, but I love this topic. The last thing for me is just really build strong relationships with the leaders. Be intentional. Don't be mad or annoyed at, connect with them. Do what we do in human resources. Connect with them, understand their fears, their hopes, their dreams, and you're putting your coach hat, partner, collaborator hat on with them to start showing how you add value with them, at least one-on-one, so you start building that trust.
Okay,
I'll
I
shut
love
up
them
now.
all. Okay, Fred?
Just a little bit of passion about this topic, eh?
Just a little bit, just a tiny bit.
This is something that I am truly passionate about as well, and I would say from a market standpoint, what you could even see, which is a positive sign, is you're seeing some companies start to shift their HR departments. We saw HR, then it went to people and culture, and now we're actually starting to see organizations release as people operations, because they want to integrate the HR function as a whole from more of an operational lens. And I think there is more sight lines from CEOs and business owners to have HR function and more in the operational lens as the organization. And how you do that is absolutely tying it to business goals. I remember a big lesson that I had when I was building presentations was thinking about it from the marketing piece, because I was building my presentation to present to other HR people. And when I was around the company ownership and the senior leaders, I'm not presenting to HR people, I'm presenting to operators which have their own responsibilities. And ultimately, the work we were doing was to support them. And so really building that presentation from that lens and understanding who is this presentation for and what am I actually trying to say really helped in getting that seat at the table, but beyond that, being welcomed to the table because my insights were helping them navigate their business and tying the work that we were doing to what was important to them at that time, which was the business strategy and moving the organization forward. And Jackie, I love the case study storytelling piece. I think that's absolutely critical. Helps them remember what you're doing, and then obviously what the actual behavior was that you want replicated. So great little tidbit there. I love that piece.
For sure. Well, I hope we've answered those two questions from Bruce. If you have any other questions, let us know, or a sub question. Last question before, wow, I can't believe it's almost time to, it's almost 1 p.m. This has been great. So one last question before I just have a quick update, and then everyone can go back to their busy schedules. But what trends in employee development should we prepare for in the next 5 years, let's say? Jackie, real quick.
What pops into my head is personalized learning paths. This is the first time
Mm.
I'm seeing a little bit more rigor, which I think is pretty cool. So when I'm brought in for coaching and or training and coaching, most leaders these days are like, well, this is her personal learning path. Like, what? It's amazing. So I'm definitely seeing a trend of tailoring development programs to individual career paths and learning styles, which I also think is quite cool. The other one I'm noticing is digital learning platforms. So leveraging tech to provide that sort of micro learning, on demand learning opportunities, which is awesome. I mean, H2R, you've got your stuff that you're offering your
Mm-hmm.
clients, mixing those kind of on demand micro learnings. I'm noticing that's a great mix when we're doing, if I'm doing a large scale coaching for a team, I'll go, what are the lessons or the insights or training you want that we can add to part of the coaching program? Definitely seeing those two. And then lastly, thank goodness, but the focus on soft skills. Years ago, I'm talking that long ago, pre-pandemic, 10 years ago even, I'd have clients going, oh, we're going to do a bit of soft skill. We have a crisis. Now I'm noticing pride. We're focusing on
Mm.
resilience or empathy or compassion. And there's an interesting, it's like the belief system has changed that we're not broken and that these aren't, because I used to be told that's fluffy bullshit stuff, but we'll do it anyway. And
Right.
now it's like, we're doing this because we know why it matters. So those are the three things I'm noticing.
Okay. Brad?
Great. I think for me, it's almost the same sentiment, but it phrased and from a different lens. What I've seen a shift in is organizations looking at learning paths more on a horizontal plateau. Traditionally, you saw organizations saying, here's your learning path and it's how to get to be a manager and then that manager above that. And what we're really seeing is this shift to designing learning programs along the horizontal plane and understanding that employees may not necessarily want to move into that manager role. How do we still upskill them? How do we keep them relevant? And how do we keep them engaged? And building learning paths along that piece. The other one that I've seen, and this is to that personalized learning path, is learning paths that are much better at getting things done and learning blocks. Part of adult learning is you need to have this sweet spot of challenging enough that they're learning, but not too challenging enough that it's too much of a stretch for them and they can't absorb and execute on the information they're receiving. And I think that's something that technology is bringing to the table is building out these learning paths, but in the actual sizable chunks that it needs to be delivered. And I think that's also why you're seeing a huge uptake in micro learning come to market, is because it does allow you to get those bite-sized chunks. And then there's also this benefit of being able to fit it into a regular work week. You don't have to do this 8 hour, 1 day or 2 day offsite to do this block of learning. So
Mhm.
we're starting to see, I think, technology bring that into the space, which is really, really welcome.
Okay.
I add a last piece because Brad, you made me think of it. I think it even came out with a client, Brad, you and I were talking about, but I'm noticing a few people being intentional about how do we train the different generations.
Mhm.
Yes.
I was thinking maybe when we're Gen Xers, we were all like the 8 hour day thing, and that some are still attached to
Mhm.
that. And so we have to educate that's not the most effective way. But also, if you're Gen Z, you want 10 or 15 minutes max on a technology platform. So it's like really understanding the different styles of learning generationally is another thought.
Mhm. I love that. Generations in the workplace is one of the trainings that we also put forward for any of our clients. So, and it speaks about that. So, all right. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you both for joining me and sharing your insights. I hope our participants and audience found it intriguing. Um, and, if you've enjoyed this, you can, send us an email letting us know what you thought. If you wanted to see more of these conversational style lunch and learns, we can definitely incorporate that more often. So, yeah. All right. So I just have a quick little update before we break. Alini, can you just pull it up? Perfect. So I just wanted to mention the upcoming H2R Executive Networking Group event that we have scheduled for September 16th from 4 to 6, and it's at the Schooner Street Brewery. I haven't been there, but it's in Waterloo. And I think Alini just shared the registration link, so you can just click on that. It is limited, so if you want to join us, do so quickly, as it will sell out. So that is all. I wish you all a great rest of the day, and we'll see you in September. Thank you for joining, and bye, everyone.